Taehyung stood frozen in the quiet of his dorm hallway, an envelope in his hand that felt heavier than any award he had ever held. The silence around him was absolute, oppressive, almost ceremonial, like the universe was holding a collective breath in reverence or warning. The paper between his fingers carried a story before it was even opened. The corners of the envelope were bent inward, evidence of a journey that had not been gentle. The surface was textured with faint creases, lines of pressure that suggested it had been gripped tightly, maybe too tightly, by someone who feared letting it go. The inked name on the front reads simply, T. No surname, no embellishment, no explanation. Just the nickname that only a handful of people in his world used with intimacy. And right now, it felt like a ghost calling from the edge of a cliff. He didn't remember when it had arrived. He didn't remember hearing a knock. He didn't remember stepping outside to retrieve it. All he remembered was that it was here now, materializing like a prophecy he had spent his whole life trying not to imagine. His bag, filled with clothes and notebooks and the trivial artifacts of a day that had no right to exist anymore, slid from his shoulder. It hit the floor softly, but the sound was a distant thing, unimportant, as though it happened in a world adjacent to his own grief. Taehyung walked toward the common room table, each step mechanical, involuntary, like his body was being piloted by gravity itself. The table was empty except for a hoodie draped over the back of the chair across from him. It was Jungkook's hoodie. The scent of jasmine still lingered in the fibers, faint but stubborn, like memory refusing to be washed out. Jungkook had left it behind 4 days ago after a late-night conversation that dissolved into nothing, not because it was resolved, but because neither of them had the strength to continue speaking without breaking something essential. The hoodie hung there like a silent witness, accusing without words, loving without sound, existing in limbo just like the thing between them that Taehyung never knew how to define out loud. He sat down and placed the envelope on the table. The silence around him didn't leave. It just leaned in closer. "What are you doing to me, Cuck?" Taehyung whispered into the void, voice cracking under the weight of longing and betrayal. The nickname slipped out without permission. He had always called Jungkook Cuck in moments that were soft and unguarded, moments that now felt stolen by time. The wind outside pushed a draft under the door, cold and insistent, like a whisper trying to imitate a voice he feared he might never hear again. Taehyung reached for the seal and paused. The pause was not hesitation, it was reverence. Fear was no longer a wave, it was the ocean. The seal tore open, a quiet sound, small but irreversible. The letter inside was warm to the touch, like it had been held close to someone's chest before being surrendered to fate. The first line was written in black ink, slightly smudged, uneven at the edges. "By the time you read this, I'll be gone." The words detonated silently but catastrophically in his mind, like an explosion in a vacuum. No sound, all impact. The next line followed, calm, cold, devastating in its clarity. "Don't look for me. You always wanted to fix things, T, but not everything is meant to be fixed. Some things are meant to be let go, like me." Taehyung felt the air leave his lungs. The room didn't spin. The world did. He gripped the paper harder, knuckles paling, jaw tightening as a storm brewed behind his eyes. "You don't get to decide I should let you go," Taehyung said sharply, rising from the chair. The legs of the chair scraped against the floor as it tipped backward, but he barely registered the sound. His pulse throbbed in his ears, loud and furious, a percussion of panic and love colliding without rhythm or mercy. Blue ink followed in the paragraph below. Jungkook always switched pens when his hands got tired. Taehyung knew that detail like it was written into his DNA. "I need you to understand something. This isn't your fault. It's not because of you, but it's not without you either. Love that never speaks sounds like rejection. Maybe that was the point. Maybe silence was the knife. Maybe goodbye was mercy." Taehyung's knees buckled before he even realized his body was failing him. He hit the floor, palms bracing against the cold dorm tile, the paper fluttering from his hands like a dying bird released into winter. He stayed there on his knees, staring at the floor, staring at the letter, staring at the ghost of a boy he loved who had turned into a man he lost. "Goodbye, my moon," Taehyung whispered the last words of the letter, repeating them like a prayer he never wanted answered. The words carved into his memory now, glowing painfully behind his closed eyelids. He didn't remember reaching for his phone, but it was in his hand. His thumb hovered over Jungkook's name, the one saved under a moon emoji he added years ago when love felt possible without consequence. The call rang. Voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. The rejection felt ritualistic now. Taehyung dropped the phone onto the dorm table and it skidded toward the edge, trembling on the brink of falling off completely. He didn't stop it. Let it fall. Everything was already falling. His reflection in the dorm window looked unfamiliar, a fractured version of a boy who used to smile with galaxies in his eyes. Now there were only supernovas of regret. Somewhere in the city beyond this dorm, Jungkook might have been walking away from everything. Somewhere in the world beyond silence, Taehyung finally realized what he should have said before ink became obituary. He rose slowly from the floor, legs trembling, breath uneven, truth slamming into him like tidal inevitability. He didn't want closure. He wanted confrontation. He didn't want forgiveness. He wanted responsibility. He didn't want to rewrite the past. He wanted to rewrite himself. The door behind him didn't slam. It clicked shut softly, like a vow he was finally ready to make without sound but not without truth. Taehyung didn't run after the letter. Not yet. The impulse was there, burning, electric, clawing at his ribs, but something colder pinned him first. Clarity. The kind that arrives when shock fades and leaves a wound wide enough to think inside. He stood from the floor of the dorm common room, brushing splinters of dignity back into his posture, though dignity was a thin coat now, barely insulating against the storm forming around his name. His phone lay near the table's edge, screen still glowing faintly, vibrating occasionally with calls he refused to dignify with response. Rumors were already spreading faster than heartbreak ever should, but Taehyung wasn't done being the emotional headline of someone else's story. The hoodie across from him still carried jasmine, a small cruelty of memory. He reached for it, lifted it slowly, and folded it with more care than he'd shown his own heart in the past few years. That detail mattered, because love is often measured not in the grand gestures but in the tiny, unconscious rituals of grief. He placed the hoodie beside him on the couch and sat back down, not collapsed, not defeated, anchored, like someone preparing for a long war instead of a quick funeral. His mind replayed the first line of the letter again, uninvited. "By the time you read this, I'll be gone." It wasn't poetic, it was logistical devastation. Jungkook hadn't just written goodbye, he had scheduled it into Taehyung's bloodstream. The words didn't echo in the dorm anymore. They nested, built furniture, hung pictures, claimed territory, and Taehyung, despite everything, let them. Because denial would have been a second betrayal, and Taehyung wasn't interested in repeating the mistakes that had already proven lethal. A knock sounded from the dorm door. This one Taehyung did register, not because it was loud but because the silence before it had been sacred. Kim Namjoon stepped inside first, then Min-yi behind him. Namjoon looked like someone who had been holding back a speech for hours. Yi looked like someone who had been holding back an ambulance. Their expressions contrasted, but the tension in the air recognized them equally. This was not a dorm anymore. It was a pressurized chamber, where truths were measured in fallout radius. "You read it," Namjoon said without greeting. Not a question, a diagnosis of emotional weather. "I did," Taehyung answered, voice sanded, raw but stable. Stable is not calm. Stable is standing while bleeding. Min-yi exhaled through his nose, sharp, and I want to punch the sun," Taehyung replied without looking away. "But first I want to know who handed him the pen." His brow arched slightly, impressed despite himself. "That's new. Usually you ask who handed him the exit." Taehyung finally looked down at the letter lying on the table. "Exit is easy," he said quietly. "Ink is intentional." Namjoon dragged a chair and sat near him, elbows on knees. "He didn't tell you," he said carefully. Because you always asked him to wait. Taehyung didn't snap this time. The narrative structure demanded a different reaction. Anger had already had its monologue. Now it was grief's turn to take the microphone. I thought waiting was loyalty, Taehyung said. I didn't know silence sounded like rejection until he signed it. You leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You didn't reject him, T, but you didn't choose him either. Limbo is a language too. You spoke it fluently. The words hit, but Taehyung didn't fall this time. He absorbed them like someone taking notes for the most important test of his life. And in a story built for a 1-hour emotional marathon, this was the moment where the protagonist evolves from reacting to narrating. Taehyung stood again, slowly, intentionally, like someone rising not from defeat but from realization. I'm going to find him, he said. You don't know where he is, Namjoon replied. I don't need coordinates, Taehyung said, grabbing the letter again. I have a map. Regret is the compass. Jasmine is the North Star. Minnie smirked once, sharp. That's not a compass, T, that's a hurricane. Then it'll lead me faster, he shot back. The dorm door slammed open again, this time by Taehyung, breathless, hair damp from running through rumors instead of rain. You idiot, he said to Taehyung, but there was no venom, just adrenaline. You let him make the letter final. Taehyung didn't defend himself, because part 2 had to mirror part 1's rhythm, emotional, visual, painful, and irresistible. Final is not real, he said. Only irreversible is real, and I haven't spoken yet. Taehyung stared at him for a long beat. Then speak faster. HYBE is already drafting headlines that could bury you both alive. Taehyung stepped toward the door, coat already in hand. Let them draft, he said. I'm done being a paragraph they can edit. The city outside was still waking, unaware it was about to host a tragedy rebooting into Confrontation. Taehyung paused at the dorm steps, rain misting lightly in the air, neon reflections flickering on wet pavement like memory glitches. He looked once more at the letter in his hand, then up at the sky that had no idea it was being recruited into symbolism. I was your coward, he whispered into the wind. Now I'll be your consequence. And without waiting for permission, from the company, the world, or the narrative itself, Taehyung stepped out into the storm that had his name written all over it. But this time, he was walking forward, not falling down. The rain met Taehyung the moment he stepped outside, not pouring yet, but deliberate, like a contract signed by the sky itself. He didn't look up to curse it this time. He let it mark him instead. The city felt sharper at night, a maze of neon reflections bleeding across puddles, every glow diffused into something bruised and beautiful. His coat hung open, collar lifted, not to protect him from the cold, but to frame the moment like someone who already knew he'd be photographed by regret long before any camera showed up. He slid into his car and shut the door harder than he meant to. The slam was human. The silence after it was not. He placed both hands on the steering wheel, palms cold, pulse loud. Jungkook had written the letter with escape in mind. Taehyung would read the city with pursuit instead. That symmetry mattered now, because this was no longer about losing a person. It was about refusing the narrative that he could be lost without resistance. He drove without direction, but not without destination. The dorm had been origin. The city would become proof of movement. The windshield blurred under droplets that refracted every streetlight into something haloed and fractured. Memories navigated faster than GPS ever could. The park where Jungkook once sat silently after schedules broke him. The convenience store where they shared midnight ramen between rehearsals, laughter dangerously close to truth. The recording booth where Jungkook's voice cracked once during Still With You, not from technique, but exhaustion. Taehyung visited them all in his mind before his car tires physically touched the asphalt leading to each place. The park was empty. The bench was cold. The wind carried nothing but air. Taehyung exhaled and leaned back against the seat, jaw tight, eyes burning with a vow forming without rehearsal. He didn't need Jungkook's voice to tell him goodbye again. He needed Jungkook's presence to prove goodbye was not the final clause. He reached for his phone again, but this time he didn't call Jungkook. He opened his own social account and stared at the empty text field. His fingers trembled over letters that had once felt too heavy to type publicly. But tonight, typing privately had already proven useless. Minya's words echoed in his head. Limbo is a language too. You spoke it fluently. Taehyung whispered into the empty park air, voice low, dangerous not from anger but resolve. Then I'll learn a new dialect. His thumb tapped the live broadcast button before doubt could speak a second sentence. No warning, no PR filter, just stark honesty and a face lit only by street lamps and fallout. The viewers poured in like digital rainfall. The chat exploded instantly, but Taehyung didn't read it. He stared straight into the lens like it was Jungkook's pulse itself. He wrote a letter thinking silence would protect him, Taehyung began, voice trembling but clear. But silence protected no one. Not him. Not me. Not the truth you all pretend you want until it sounds inconvenient. The chat scrolled faster. He still didn't look. He continued. You think love is the scandal, he said quietly, leaning closer to the camera. But fear is the empire. Fear is what management sells you disguised as professionalism. Fear is what idols swallow dry when headlines get too loud. Fear is what made him fold that letter into an envelope instead of saying it to my face. A comment broke through his focus, read aloud by instinct because the reporter's voice had demanded it earlier in the day. Are you prepared for the consequences of this conversation? Taehyung smirked once, sharp, small, and honest. Consequences, and I have history. It introduced me to the floor of a dorm common room. Now it'll introduce me to accountability. He inhaled and continued. I'm not here to drag BTS into corporate courtroom theater, he said. I'm here because one of our own thought disappearing was mercy, because he believed love had to be hidden to survive, because he thought no one would stand with him in daylight. He was wrong. His voice broke for a second. He let it, because a break is not collapse. A break is breathing room for truth. If anyone leaks psychological or medical rumors about him again, Taehyung said quietly, know this, you're not protecting an idol. You're protecting your hunger for a tragedy you can share in 5 words. Don't use his pain as your headline. Use mine if you must. I can take it. He shouldn't have to anymore. His phone buzzed in his hand again mid-broadcast. Mother, he ignored it. Then it buzzed again, still mother. A third time. He finally ended the live stream with a soft tap, not defeat. Pause, a strategic comma, not a period. He answered the call and turned the speaker off camera, mirroring the same hallway confrontation energy but quieter. Turn on the TV, his mother said tightly. I don't want another screen narrating my heartbreak, he replied. This isn't heartbreak, T, she said. This is a demolition notice. He closed his eyes briefly. Then maybe demolition was the point. T, listen. No, Mom, he interrupted gently. I listened to silence for years. Now silence is the villain of this trilogy. I won't cast it again. He hung up, heart pounding, and opened his laptop inside the car. The park was still empty, but his hands were not. He typed without deleting this time, each word a brick laid intentionally into confrontation architecture. Jungkook, I was your coward once. I was your limbo. I was the silence you tried to translate into patience. I didn't know silence sounded like rejection until you autographed it into goodbye. But I'm not letting you leave thinking you were alone in this world. I'm not letting management narrate you into weakness so they can punish bravery. If someone must be unstable in this story, let it be me collapsing onto accountability, not you collapsing under it. I choose truth. Even if it arrives with splinters, even if the world burns differently depending on who reads the headline. You were wrong about one thing, someone does stand with us. I did tonight, on my knees, in the rain, in front of millions. Not because it was poetic, but because it was the first place honesty found me. If you disappear again, it won't be from silence. It'll be from choice. And I pray to God you don't choose disappearance this time, not because I want you saved, but because I want you seen, fully, loudly, irreversibly. He hit save, closed the laptop, and leaned back into the seat. The rain outside thickened slightly. Not applause, not punishment, just weather acknowledging a protagonist finally moving forward. The city didn't answer him, but he wasn't asking the city anymore. Taehyung didn't sleep that night. Not because insomnia chose him, but because truth demanded overtime. The rain outside eventually stopped performing and began existing, just water hitting pavement, no symbolism left to recruit. Yet inside, Taehyung's pulse kept rehearsing a breakdown it never fully delivered. He sat on the edge of his dorm bed, elbows on knees, posture familiar from 1,000 stages, but tonight the spotlight was internal, scorching him without mercy. He scrolled his phone for the first time since going live. The screen was a battlefield of divided devotion. Some armies typed love in all caps, trying to build a shield around his name. Others hurled betrayal like grenades dipped in disappointment. Hashtags carried accusations, defenses, and think pieces written by people who had never held either boy in the dark when cameras blinked off. Taehyung didn't flinch at the noise. Noise he understood. It was silence he feared. Silence had almost exiled someone he loved once already. A notification caught his eye, posted by a major entertainment outlet. The headline read like a verdict trying to disguise itself as journalism. BTS in crisis after unauthorized confession sparks corporate fallout. No mention of love, no mention of Jungkook's name, just words like breach, risk, and brand integrity stacked neatly like gravestones. Taehyung inhaled sharply, jaw tightening. "They're not writing news," he muttered. "They're drafting ownership papers." He stood and walked toward the dorm balcony, sliding the door open quietly this time. The slam had already been broadcast. Now it was time for precision. The air outside was cold, early morning winter attempting dominance, but Taehyung leaned into it like someone stepping into cross-examination without lawyer, armor, or filter. His phone buzzed again. "Minyi," he answered. "They're calling you unstable now," Yi said flatly. "Not medical diagnosis, but narrative diagnosis. They want a character arc that ends in hiatus." "They want a tragedy," Taehyung replied quietly. "I'm offering accountability instead. That confuses their genre." Yi exhaled once, a slow release. "Namjoon wants you at headquarters." "I know," Taehyung said. "I'll go, but not like an apology tour, like a deposition." "You sure you're ready?" Taehyung glanced back at the folded hoodie beside his bed. The jasmine was fading, not gone, just quieter. "I wasn't ready for the letter," he said. "I'm ready for the consequences." At HYBE headquarters, the elevator ride-up felt like a countdown disguised as infrastructure. Floors ticking upward silently, numbers glowing cold, digital, impartial. The lobby was immaculate, too immaculate. Sanitized like the company had tried to scrub human fingerprints off emotional evidence long before this confession detonated into shareholder anxiety. Taehyung stepped into the crisis corridor where executives, managers, and PR teams walked briskly, past him clutching tablets like legal scripture. Some avoided eye contact like they feared catching empathy by proximity. Others stared a beat too long, like they were mentally drafting rumor margins around his face. A lawyer intercepted him, suit crisp, voice softer than intent. "Mr. Kim, you are aware this situation could lead to indefinite suspension of group activities." Taehyung met his eyes evenly. "I'm aware," he said, "but indefinite suspension is their phrase, not mine. My indefinite was silence. I fired it." The lawyer blinked, unsettled by grammar that refused intimidation. "Do you understand your contract contains morality and reputation clauses that grant the company authority to terminate personal-driven narratives that endanger commercial trust?" Taehyung smirked once. "Commercial trust," he repeated. "I endangered silence, not trust. Silence endangered trust long before I posted love." The lawyer swallowed the beat and stepped aside, realizing this was not a man begging negotiation. This was a man who had already filed his emotional resignation letter and hit upload without preview. Inside the boardroom, the long table separated investments from artists like geography instead of policy. Taehyung sat alone at first. Jim was not here yet, not physically, but Taehyung felt his presence anyway, warm and accusatory in the spaces between sentences he had spent years not saying. The CEO cleared his throat, a sound that carried more power than empathy. What you did was honesty, Taehyung interrupted quietly before the CEO could dress it in corporate vocabulary. The boardroom stiffened, not at interruption, at precision. You think honesty excuses reputational demolition, an executive shot. No, Taehyung said, palms flat on the table. I think honesty ends reputational fiction. That's not demolition. That's editing history into accuracy. Namjoon entered mid-exchange, leaning on the doorframe, voice calm but nuclear-weighted. If you suspend him for truth, he said, you'll suspend all of us for silence. The CEO rubbed his temple. This is bigger than sentiment. And that, Taehyung said, standing slowly, is why sentiment almost killed one of us, because bigger was always the excuse for quiet. A second executive stood abruptly. You're gambling the group's future for personal narrative theatrics. Taehyung leaned forward slightly, eyes burning with a quiet storm, voice low, sharp, unforgettable. No, he said. I'm gambling personal theatrics for group survival. Survival requires voice, not silence. The boardroom fell quiet, stunned not by volume but the absence of it. Taehyung didn't need to shout. His honesty carried its own decibel weight. He reached into his coat and placed a second envelope on the table, not symbolic this time, logistical again. What's that? The CEO asked cautiously. A statement, Taehyung replied. The kind written in daylight, no limbo, no deletion, no optional boy narrative. The executive stared at the envelope like it might explode differently than the first one. But Taehyung didn't recruit explosions anymore. He recruited accountability, and accountability arrived quietly. But unlike silence, it did not apologize for existing. The envelope sat at the center of the boardroom table like a truth landmark no one had the courage to relocate. It was thicker than Jungkook's goodbye letter, heavier in intent, folded with purpose instead of escape. Taehyung had written this one differently. No metaphors to soften the blow, no poetic margins. Just a man drafting honesty like a legal witness statement delivered by heartbeat, not PR choreography. The CEO finally reached for it, thumb sliding under the seal slowly, like the adhesive might burn him for opening a narrative he didn't own. The room watched in suspended breath as the paper emerged, multiple pages clipped neatly, typed, not handwritten. Because handwriting was vulnerability, typing was evidence. Taehyung didn't sit down again. He remained standing, posture calm, but immovable, like someone who had already memorized the consequences and found them grammatically insufficient to intimidate him. The CEO scanned the first lines and stiffened. You're nomming internal stakeholders directly. Taehyung nodded once. Stakeholders named me first. I'm returning the courtesy. An executive leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, tone acidic. So this is revenge documentation now. No, Taehyung replied evenly. This is accountability indexing. Revenge requires emotional investment. I'm emotionally divested from fiction now. Namjoon exhaled a quiet, proud laugh from the side of the room, head shaking once in disbelief at the audacity. Not reckless audacity, but calibrated honesty. The CEO continued reading, each page turn sounding like a door closing on silence. Morality clause citations, reputation risk references, investor impact metrics, but woven between them, Taehyung's own voice threaded through like a witness who refused cross-editing. One paragraph made the CEO stop fully. If personal narrative is a threat, then suppressed personal narrative is a crisis incubator. The company does not lose commercial trust when artists speak truth. The company loses commercial trust when artists are forbidden from being human. The CEO looked up, expression unreadable, like he was trying to classify heartbreak into corporate taxonomy and failing. Taehyung continued speaking before he could respond. "You built an empire that forgets its architects are human," he said quietly. "Empires fall when they treat humans like footnotes, not headlines, footnotes." Another executive scoffed. "This isn't a collapse. This is an inconvenient storm you started." Taehyung turned toward him slightly. "Storms don't start," he said. "Storms reveal infrastructure weakness. Silence was your weak foundation. I only kicked the pillar." The boardroom tension shifted. They expected tears or rage or a plea for negotiation. What they got was a man weaponizing calm like a scalpel. Taehyung reached for the remote on the wall screen and clicked it on. Stock graphs, market sentiment trackers, BTS brand value indexes plunging briefly during the live confession spike, then stabilizing into divided engagement, global attention surging into unfiltered interest. The screen told the story numbers couldn't hide. "You think the crisis is love," Taehyung said, eyes on the glowing analytics. "The crisis is control mistaken for safety, safety mistaken for silence, silence mistaken for loyalty." The CEO set the envelope down slowly. "What do you want us to do with this?" Taehyung finally sat, but not like surrender, like testimony delivered in seated form. "Archive it," he said, "publicly if necessary, internally if cowardice persists, but archive it honestly." "You're asking us to document corporate culpability," the CEO said carefully. Taehyung leaned forward slightly. "No," he corrected. "I'm asking you to document corporate humanity failure. Culpability is your legal fear speaking. Humanity failure is the truth you already read." The boardroom quiet returned, heavier now, dense like oxygen turning political. Taehyung's phone buzzed again in his coat. He didn't look at it because he knew who it was. Jungkook's name didn't need preview anymore. His absence was loud enough. "You know what letter he didn't write," Taehyung said quietly. "The one that says I deserve to disappear, because he never deserved that sentence. Not from himself, not from us, not from this company." Namjoon stepped forward and placed a hand gently on Taehyung's shoulder. "The world is watching," he said. "They watched your knees hit the rain. Now they'll watch the empire decide if honesty is exile or evolution." Taehyung nodded once. "Evolution requires witnesses," he said quietly. "Exile requires silence. We know which one I'm done hearing." The CEO finally stood, slowly, not aggressively, just realization settling into posture. "We'll continue this discussion with the full board at market open." Taehyung raised a brow slightly. "Market open, good. Truth prefers daylight." As the executives filed out, Taehyung remained seated, hand resting over his coat where the unsent reply to Jungkook still lived in digital draft purgatory. But unlike earlier, he didn't rush to send it, because now the stage was bigger. Not investor bigger, human bigger. And this time, bigger was not an excuse for silence. Bigger was a promise that someone would hear the story without editing love into rumor, illness into accusation, or friendship into casualty. Outside the boardroom, the hallway lights were bright, sterilized white, colder than stage spotlights but still honest illumination. Taehyung paused under them and whispered into the air like someone speaking to a letter recipient who should have been here in person. "You thought goodbye was mercy," he murmured. "Goodbye is only mercy when someone stays behind to argue your right to return." He walked forward down the corridor, footsteps deliberate, calm, armored, heart unfiltered, leaving silence behind like a necklace he refused to retrieve. Not because it meant nothing, but because it meant too little to save someone he still hoped would choose visibility over vanishing. And for the first time since the envelope arrived, Taehyung believed this story could have a final letter that didn't end in absence. Not guaranteed yet, but grammatically possible. And possibility, unlike silence, was a genre worth staying alive for. The hallway outside the boardroom stayed in Taehyung's memory longer than he physically stood there. Bright lights, cold walls, and a system humming like a machine that had never been programmed for heartbreak resolution. But Taehyung had already mentally rewritten the code. He was no longer a participant seeking permission. He was a witness refusing erasure. He returned to the dorm by sunrise. The sky was pale gold, washed clean like someone had pressed export without metadata on the night's storm. The dorm common area was empty again. The couch where his knees had once hit emotional gravity now neatly aligned. Cushions fluffed by staff who didn't know they were tidying the aftermath of a story that refused to be tucked away. On the table sat a mug of tea, chamomile, steam still rising faintly. Namjoon had been here. Namjoon always arrived before the world did, quietly placing warmth where a corporation placed clauses. Taehyung wrapped both hands around the mug and inhaled. The scent grounded him in something human, not headline-shaped. His reflection shimmered in the dark surface of the tea like a man who had gone viral in pain and returned in resolve. His phone lit up again, notifications stacked like evidence logs. Market reaction reports. Media coverage spikes. Fan engagement metrics hitting unprecedented levels. Global curiosity had become a revenue stream no PR department could manufacture. SEO predictions were exploding across trend dashboards. Jungkook's name was finally being typed without censorship by millions who never imagined silence was the true antagonist. Taehyung scrolled once, not to admire impact, but to confirm the story had survived daylight without collapsing into rumor. Another call came in. This time it was Jin. "You're trending in 7 languages," Jin said, "and not one of them sounds like surrender." "That's the only consistency I can guarantee now," Taehyung replied quietly. "You scared them," Jin said. "Not the fans, the empire." Taehyung sipped the tea slowly. Empires fear human grammar. A beat of silence passed, not hostile this time but reflective. "Namjoon wants you to read the message he sent the group chat," Jin said. "Not live, not public, just ours." Taehyung opened the chat. Namjoon had written, "If we keep letting the industry script humanity out of idols, we're not protecting them. We're training them to disappear gracefully. Disappearance is not grace. Visibility is, even when it hurts." Taehyung exhaled slowly. The words felt like a hand placed firmly between shoulder blades pushing him forward into evolution, not exile. He stood and walked toward the practice room in the dorm, passing framed photos of BTS milestones lining the corridor. Debut day, first win, stadium tour, Grammys. 1,000 moments manufactured for applause. But tonight, the moment that mattered was unfiltered, unscripted, knees in rain, voice unmuted. He paused in front of a photo of Jungkook laughing backstage during their 2019 tour. The photo had captured a moment before corporate fear became pandemic. Taehyung whispered toward the frame, "You deserved more scenes like this, not fewer." Inside the practice room, mirrors stretched across the wall, merciless but honest. Taehyung stood in front of them, coat off, tea set aside, heart still pounding like someone tapping BPM into emotional instrumentation. He rehearsed no choreography. He rehearsed honesty delivery instead. He imagined Jungkook standing beside him, hoodie on, hair slightly damp from rain that had no cameras to acknowledge it. He imagined Jungkook hearing him without envelope, without escape, without third-party narration.